Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today we're going to be talking about Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa. Now, I'm going to be referring to Betsy as Betsy Hackman because now we know after last Friday's press conference that that was her legal name. So in this video, I will be referring to Betsy as Betsy Hackman. Now, this is a follow-up to my last video, and I wanted to make it a little sooner, but I was waiting for some of the information that we were hearing to be confirmed. There's been a lot of information going around out there, and some of it seemed rather outlandish and unbelievable. Some of it made a lot of sense, but there was some information that I felt like we needed confirmation on, and I knew that we were going to get that in the press conference on Friday by Santa Fe Sheriff's Office. Now, I think a lot of us were very surprised after hearing the press conference last Friday, because I don't think a lot of us expected that Betsy had passed away before her husband, Gene. It didn't make a lot of sense. Gene Hackman was 95 years old, and Betsy was 30 years younger. She was only 65 years old. So it came as kind of a shock when I heard that Betsy had passed away before Gene. Now, it sounded odd because what are the chances of that happening? You know, that a 65-year-old is going to pass away from natural causes before her 95-year-old husband. It seemed strange, but not necessarily suspicious. You know, I feel like there were some aspects of this case that were very confusing. But once the medical examiner stood up at the podium and explained what had happened to the couple, it made a lot more sense. And it made even more sense if you're familiar with the state of New Mexico. I want to go back to the beginning and talk a little bit about where this all started and how this became so strange. Now, when law enforcement arrived to the home of Gene and Betsy Hackman in Hyde Park of Santa Fe, New Mexico, they found the couple deceased. Gene was in one room and Betsy was in the bathroom. Now, they also found a dog that was deceased. And this is what kind of added to the mystery because, of course, a lot of us were thinking gas leak, carbon monoxide poisoning. You know, and then when we found out that that wasn't the case, that there was no gas leak and no carbon monoxide was found, that's when it got really strange because we were thinking, how did two adults lose their lives along with one of their dogs at exactly the same time? So it didn't make a lot of sense. Now, there was a lot of speculation, and I had a theory of my own, and I'll be the first to admit my theory was not correct. I believed that Gene Hackman had passed away first and that Betsy had found Gene, but that's not how it happened. We learned that Betsy had actually passed away first and that Gene had passed away approximately 6 days later. Now we know that Gene, Betsy, and the family dog did not pass away simultaneously, as we originally believed. Betsy, according to investigators, passed away approximately 6 days before her husband, Gene. So I want to start out with Betsy because the medical examiner came out and stated that she passed away from hantavirus. Now, if you're not familiar with the hantavirus, it's basically a virus that's carried by mice, and it's not something that's very common. It's actually very rare, but there have been more cases in the state of New Mexico than anywhere else in the country. I think that the medical examiner said that there's been 136 cases in the last 50 years. So although it's not very common, you know, it does happen. As I said in my last video, Gene and Betsy lived on a mountain, basically. It was wooded. There's a lot of brush, and there's also a lot of mice, deer mice in particular, and these mice do carry the hantavirus. Now, I have heard a lot of people say, how did Betsy come into contact with these mice droppings? You know, how did she contract the hantavirus? And there's a lot of ways that mice can spread their droppings around. A lot of times they're in your kitchen and you don't even know it. So it's very possible that their droppings can get on your kitchen counters, get into your food. I mean, it sounds gross, but that's how this virus is spread. And like I said, it's not very common. It's very, very rare. And even people who do get the hantavirus, a lot of times, they live. I know one person who has had the hantavirus, and although it made them very sick, they lived. So it kind of seemed odd that Betsy, who was 65 years old and described as very fit, would lose her life to this virus. Let's talk about what investigators have told us about the days leading up to Betsy's passing. Now, we know that on February the 9th, she went to the vet and picked up her dog. This is the same dog that was found deceased in the house. And her dog had just had a surgical procedure, which explains why it was in a kennel. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. But Betsy seemed to be rather active between the 9th and the 11th. We know that on the 11th, she was out running errands. She was at the grocery store, and she was picking up stuff for dinner and basically just living her everyday life. Now, there was no communication to and from Betsy's cell phone after February the 11th. And this is why law enforcement believes that this is the day that Betsy Hackman passed away. When reports first began coming out about law enforcement finding Gene and Betsy Hackman deceased in their home, we heard from investigators that Betsy was discovered first, and she was discovered laying on the bathroom floor. Now, they also said that there was a lot of medication that was scattered around this bathroom, along with a space heater that was found next to her body. Now, investigators said that Betsy appeared to fall abruptly, so it happened suddenly. And in my opinion, I think what happened was that it's very possible that Betsy was simply taking her medication that day, or maybe even getting that medication for Gene when she had a medical episode that was caused by the hantavirus. Now, Betsy may not have even known that she had the hantavirus. So I think that's very possible. Now, I think she had this medical episode, and that's why she dropped the bottle of medication. That's why it was scattered around the bathroom. I also think that when she fell abruptly, that she went to brace herself on the bathroom counter. And this is possibly when she dragged the space heater down with her. And this is why it was found next to her. Now, we have to remember that Gene Hackman is still alive in the house at this time. So according to investigators, Betsy Hackman passed away on February the 11th, and she was on the bathroom floor. Now, her dog was locked in a kennel, and a lot of people have said, if Gene Hackman was still alive inside the house, why didn't he find his wife? And why didn't he know to let the dog out of the kennel? But if you have ever been around someone who has advanced Alzheimer's, then I think it would be more understandable. Gene Hackman had heart problems, but he also had advanced Alzheimer's. And I think that Betsy was doing everything for him. I don't think that Gene was very active, and I don't think that he was in the right frame of mind due to his Alzheimer's. So it didn't surprise me that Gene Hackman did not find his wife on the bathroom floor, and definitely didn't surprise me that he didn't think to let the dog out of the kennel. Like I said, I think that Betsy was taking care of Gene 100% at that point. And I don't think that Gene was really in the right frame of mind to know what was going on around him. Now, that's just my opinion, because we've heard from Gene Hackman's children that he was in great shape, they said. They said he was doing Pilates and yoga. And I just don't believe that. I don't, from the pictures that I've seen, of Gene right before he passed away, I don't believe that he was doing yoga, and I don't believe he was doing Pilates. I think that Betsy was doing everything for Gene at that point, making sure that he stayed hydrated, making sure that he was eating, and also making sure that he was taking his medication. So, and I think that this is the reason that Gene Hackman passed 6 days later, because I don't believe he was getting his medication. I don't think he would have remembered to take his medication, or maybe even knew what medications he was supposed to take. So I think it's very possible that this is why Gene passed away 6 days later, because who was feeding him? Who was making sure that he was hydrated? And who was making sure that he was taking his medication? Now, we know that the dog, passed away from dehydration. The dog was locked inside of the kennel, and that's how she lost her life. So it's a very tragic situation. And it's like I said in my last video, I truly believe that this was a series of events that happened that led to this conclusion. Now, does it sound strange that Gene was walking around this humongous house, not aware that his wife was deceased on the bathroom floor? It seems odd. But like I said, if you've ever been around someone who has Alzheimer's, it would explain a lot of things. Because I don't think that, I think that even if Gene had found his wife, he may not even be able to, process what he was seeing. I think that even if Gene saw that this dog was locked inside this kennel, I don't believe that he would be able to process, that he needed to let this dog out so that it could get water and food. I think that Gene was in a state of decline himself with his own health. And when Betsy passed away, I think that, Gene didn't really know how to take care of himself. And he may not have even known that he wasn't taking care of himself, because that's kind of how Alzheimer's is. So it didn't surprise me that after Betsy passed away, that Gene would pass away soon after. So now we know that it was a series of events that happened that led to this conclusion. Betsy, her passing is kind of what set this all in motion. Now, by no fault of her own, of course, but it was just a weird series of events, I think, that when law enforcement got there, it looked odd. So, and I think we all felt like it looked kind of odd. But now that it's been explained, it's still strange. But in my opinion, it's not necessarily suspicious. I never suspected that there was foul play. I knew that there was a possibility, of course, but there was no sign of foul play. So I knew there had to be some sort of explanation. And on Friday, the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office laid all that out for us. The medical examiner explained exactly what happened. And even though it does seem odd, for me, it's a lot more tragic. Not only is the fact that they both passed away along with their dog a tragedy, but there's also other tragedies involved in this story. And, if you really think about it, Betsy passed away on February the 11th. Gene passed away 6 days later on February the 17th. And they weren't discovered until February the 26th. So nobody checked on Gene and Betsy for over 2 weeks. Nobody had called to see where they were at or why they weren't answering. It seems as though they would have had people who helped them around this property. This is a huge property. So it would seem odd that Betsy was taking care of this place all by herself. It's very tragic to me. It's sad that nobody checked on Gene and Betsy for over 2 weeks. Gene and Betsy were just kind of on their own. I just think that's really sad. Something else that I think is very tragic is that Gene Hackman was an amazing actor. He was an amazing artist. He had accomplished a lot in his life. He was very successful and he was very well known. He was famous. And He worked very hard at his craft, I'm sure. But after all of this life and all of these accomplishments, Alzheimer's robbed him of all of those memories. So, I think about that, and I wonder if Gene Hackman even knew, all of the stuff that he accomplished. I wonder if he even had those memories, or if he even remembered everything that he had done in his amazing life. Alzheimer's is a very sad disease. And so there's a lot of tragedies here. It's not just their deaths, but there's a lot going on in this story. I wasn't really planning on making a follow-up video to this story because I talk about everything true crime. On Unfiltered Lucky, which is my channel, we talk about true crime. And in my opinion, there wasn't a crime committed here. This isn't a true crime story. But I did want to come on and do a follow-up video because I told you all that I would. And I also wanted to kind of come on and talk about this a little bit, try to make some sense of everything that we've heard. Now, we know that, investigators have come to a conclusion, and I accept that conclusion. Like I said, it's odd, but it's possible. And I do believe that this is what happened to Gene and Betsy Hackman. Tomorrow, we'll be going back and talking about the Idaho 4 case because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I have some thoughts about the 911 call as well as the texts. So stay tuned for that. And, thanks for hanging out with me today. If you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope that y'all had an amazing day. We'll see you next time.